right, well, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be digging into NetSuite standard budgeting and exploring a few tips and tricks along the way for strategies to do better forecasting. Before working in NetSuite, I worked as a data analyst, deep in SQL tables, identifying trends and projecting future expectations for growth. So I tend to like the budgeting topic as it merges both data-driven decision-making and forecasting. What we're going to cover today will include the high-level background of NetSuite standard budgeting, what it is, and what it is not, the key data components that you should consider as they will affect your budgeting approach, how to create budgets conceptually, how to report on your budget versus actuals, and then we will jump into NetSuite for a demo of some of what we covered in the presentation, some recommendations on getting started, and a strategy of retrieving historical data to help you begin forecasting and budgeting. Standard NetSuite budgeting is built into core financials. This means everyone should have access to it. It's easy to turn on and start using, but making robust use of it takes time, effort, and intentionality. Its primary use is to forecast income and expenses by period, but you can also budget for balance sheet accounts, statistical accounts, and customer, project, or item-specific impacts. You can also budget for multiple scenarios or outcomes. For example, a best case budget, a worst case budget, and an average outcome budget. The end goal of standard budgeting is basic reporting, including a report that displays an income statement based on your budget data, called a budget income statement, and usually of more interest, a budget versus actuals report, which will show your budget numbers side by side with your actuals as they occur. A few things to consider before deciding to use budgeting. You should define your purpose statement, the why behind your desire to start budgeting. That will help you set your target and keep your budgeting decisions in scope. You can always start small and budget with more complexity over time, but if you bite off more than you can chew, you can find yourself overwhelmed quite quickly. Budgeting typically takes a dedicated resource, or at least one with a significant amount of availability. Availability to create and maintain your budgets, in addition to reporting on them. You should also consider the level of effort you are willing to commit to when deciding for what to budget, and if you have reliable historical data off of which to level set your budget, so that your forecasting effort isn't just guesswork. With those things in mind, let's look at what budgeting is and what it is not. Standard budgeting is included based on your chart of accounts and by period or fiscal year. It supports both fiscal year, so you could budget for the year, and by period, more common. The native classifications of department, class, and location, you may have those renamed in your environment, in addition to items, customers, and projects. I mentioned on the previous slide that standard budgeting does support multiple budgets or scenarios, and of course, supports the end goal of budgeting, which is budget versus actual reporting. Maybe just as important, here is what standard budgeting is not. It does not incorporate or display your historical data. You can use other NetSuite tools to actually view or export your historical data, and we'll get into that in a bit. It is not AI or intelligence driven, at least not any more than the user setting up the budgets. It does not automatically perform calculations or trend analysis or any kind of modeling to help you populate your budgets. And lastly, it is not NSPB, also called NetSuite Planning and Budgeting, which is an advanced planning module that requires a project to implement and does not incorporate some of the aforementioned capabilities. With that, we are ready to jump into the core components of your environment that make up the budgeting framework. Number one, your chart of accounts. The simpler, the better. Keep in mind that budgeting is by account. So for accurate, holistic budgets, you need to budget for every major account you want to consider. The more granular or detailed your chart of accounts, the more granular and detailed your budgets typically need to be. Keep in mind, too, that inactive or summary accounts can't be budgeted for because they can't be posted to. So you cannot budget at the roll-up account level unless that account is an active postable account. Number two, your subsidiary hierarchy. You can budget locally for a specific sub or globally for a subsidiary grouping based on your hierarchy. So in this example shown, you can see here in the middle of the screen, I can budget locally at any of the 9 subsidiaries shown, including headquarters, or I can budget globally for headquarters and all of the subsidiaries underneath it. This is, of course, for a single budget. If I had 2 subsidiaries, let's say underneath United States, say a Western States subsidiary and an Eastern States subsidiary, I could also budget globally on the United States subsidiary and budget for data within those 3 subs all at once. United States, Western States, and Eastern States. Or I could break up my budgets and have separate ones for each. Number 3, less exciting and not shown on the slide. You can only budget by the way you have your fiscal periods and calendars set up. If you have a non-standard or 445 setup, budgeting can be quite a bit more complex. For most of you, that shouldn't be an issue. Number 4, a core budgeting component already mentioned is the fact that you can have multiple budgets or scenarios. These are called budget categories. Number 5, classifications. Your setup, your structure. For departments, classes, and locations, drive what you can budget by. I will explain that in a bit and a bit more, and showcase that in our demo as well. But keep in mind that your native classifications are a key component of your budgeting if you want to look at or forecast your data more granularly than by subsidiary and account. With that, let's talk about creating a budget for the first time. At a high level, I will demo these same steps in just a moment, but we have to complete 3 steps to create a budget. 1, we have to pick our subsidiary, our budget year, and our budget category. Remember, that's our predefined scenario for this budget. 2, we have to pick any classifications or selections for this budget. Remember, that's customer/project, item, and more commonly, class, department, and/or location. 3, we have to populate a matrix with our budget amounts. The matrix has a y-axis of all of our accounts and an x-axis of all of our periods for the selected budget year. NetSuite has 3 shortcuts to help us populate that matrix. The first and second are called distribute and fill. They are buttons in the user interface, and I'll demo both of those in just a minute. The third shortcut is a CSV import option, where we can use Excel to build out our budgets, and then we can import those directly into NetSuite after we convert our file to a CSV format. But what then? After creating budgets, what do we do with them? How do we view them? And that's where our reports come in. NetSuite provides 3 native budget reports, 2 built around a budget income statement concept, and maybe more helpfully, the third is built as a budget versus actual. These reports enable us to analyze budgeted and actual financials to determine how closely our costs and billings compare to those that were originally budgeted. The budget versus actual report has the same selections as our budget originally did, so we can slice it to only look at certain classifications at one time, and it displays, as you can see it here on this slide, an actuals amount column, a budgeted amount column, an amount over budget column, and a % of budget calculation. We can then adjust what budget category or scenario we want to look at to compare our actuals against which scenarios are most closely represented by our actuals, allowing us to make data-driven decisions as we go throughout the year. This could include adjusting our budgets up and down, making actual business and real-time decisions based on what our budget versus actuals are showing us, and many more. We could spend our entire time together here today just talking about budget versus actual reporting, but I think it would be of more interest to show you a demonstration of these topics within NetSuite, so that's where we're headed now. Okay, here we are in NetSuite now. You can see my subsidiary navigator breaks down what my subsidiary hierarchy looks like. You'll be able to see a couple components of my chart of accounts here in just a second. Using a demo environment, it's a pretty standard setup. And let's say my financial periods are set up in a standard calendar format as well. So seeing some of that as we go through the system. You'll notice a few classifications along the way, but we won't go into those long listings, and we'll just jump right into our budget categories. To navigate to our budget categories, we first go to our accounting lists through Setup, Accounting, Accounting Lists. When we select budget category here, we see the listing of budget categories that we have. For most of our time today, we'll take a look at the US sales income budget category that I've set up previously. You can see that a budget category is just that, a category. You simply have to fill out a name for your category, your scenario, and then indicate whether that budget category is global and should consider a subsidiary group, or a local one, as this is, with global unchecked, means that this is a local budget category. With that set up, I can navigate to budgets through transactions, financial, set up budgets. If I click on this link right here, it'll take me to the screen I'm on now. If I click on the word list or search, I'll be able to perform a review of what budgets exist in my system already. And we'll get to import here shortly to talk about our CSV import methodology. When I select a subsidiary, my fiscal year, and my budget category, in this case, I have a company-wide budget that has some data in it, data might start to populate as I select different classifications here on the right-hand side. You'll notice that I currently have selected the class of personnel and a production department, essentially capturing costs from a personnel grouping that I have related to my production department. You'll see that my account types I'm looking at in this budget right now are income and expense. I could further refine that just to look at expense, and NetSuite will reduce the number of accounts I'm looking at to include just those of type expense. I can also look at balance sheet or all accounts at the same time, but for this example, we'll just stick here with expense. So recall that as I'm filling out this matrix, I have two helpful shortcuts. As I fill in a total for an account, so you'll notice that my 5001 purchases account and 5002 direct labor and overtime account are already populated. But if I need to fill out a general 5000 COGS budget, I can put in a total into the cell itself. So 1.2 million. And I could do that for each and every cell. That can take quite a bit of time, and that's why we have two user interface shortcuts that come native to us. So the first, if I input a total into my first cell and select that I want to apply one of these shortcuts to that row, the first I'll show you is the word fill. Fill takes the total in that first cell for any selected row and fills that total across all 12 periods. You'll notice that as I scroll to the right, 1.2 million shows up in every cell for the period. But maybe that's not what I meant to do. Maybe I meant 1.2 million should be distributed across the periods of this year, leaving 100,000 in every cell. Same exact sequence, filling out the first cell of total that I want to distribute, selecting the row to apply that shortcut to, and then clicking distribute breaks that out across. Moving on to one shortcut I didn't mention in the PowerPoint that I thought would be good to cover here in our demo. I can copy budgets once I already have them in my system. So no help getting them in the first time, but once I have a budget to work with, I can select the budget year and budget category that I want to copy to a new budget year and or category. I have some selections here to keep some of those classifications the same or to kind of wipe them out. Same thing, I have this account type selection, but most importantly, I have a modify by percentage. I'll read the field help because I think it's very straightforward. Enter a percentage by which to increase or decrease copied budget data amounts. Enter a positive percentage to increase amounts enter a negative percentage to decrease amounts. This is an incredibly helpful way, once you have an initial budget, to copy an existing to a new to create an alternative scenario. Think about a basic, 10 or 15% increase, kind of like a positive scenario, especially when it relates to income, or a negative scenario, decreased amounts when it comes to income. Again, we'll look at more income-focused budgets here in just a moment. So those are my user interface shortcuts that are most helpful and easy to use. Next is the import assistant. More commonly than filling out a budget in the user interface is to rely on Excel for some helpful forecasting, trend analysis to build out that information into a matrix, rather than using a UI setup to fill out all of those cells. Typically, everyone's budgeting in Excel. So how do we get our Excel budget into NetSuite? Following that same navigation path of transactions, financial, set up budgets, import, takes me to this import assistant. Notice that you import separately than a regular setup import CSV records that most of you are familiar with. Budgets is handled just a little bit differently. If you don't know what format that this import assistant is expecting your file in, you can see this link right here, underlined budgets template file. Let's take a look at that together. NetSuite provides you the formatting that you need to provide its data in. We expand this out here. You'll see it's very straightforward. The exact same cells that we'd be filling out in the user interface simply need to be filled out in Excel. So we have our budget year, our category, and then our classification. Customer job, that's our project. Item, department, class, location. Note that all of those are optional. You can leave them blank, but account is not optional. We have to fill out our year, category, and then our account and subsidiary at minimum, as well as some amounts. After that, we're just filling out those amounts in our cells to provide those budgeted amounts. If you do not want to provide any information for classification, you simply leave them blank or omit them from the file altogether, and nothing will get imported. We will take a look at that in just one moment. All right, so now let's think about helpful tips and tricks to get our data out of the system for us to use in our budgeting. We aren't just making up numbers, at least ideally we aren't. We're using historical data from our ERP, ideally, to help us forecast what our projected income and expenses are. So the first methodology that I have a recommendation for you is you could create a saved search that groups by subsidiary and by account all of your GL impacts that have posted for all of history. So notice, I'm not looking at the detailed transaction level, but rather I'm looking at a summed or grouped level for each of those classifications for which I care to budget. Creating basic filters can be very helpful if I only want to look at a small selection of that information. For example, maybe I only care about the United States subsidiary for this budget, and maybe I only care about my income accounts. Maybe even more specifically, maybe I only care about a specific, product line or department for my products, maybe home goods. And now I've gone from thousands of rows of data to help me budget for a very specific scenario. I want to budget for my income in my United States subsidiary in a specific product department, my home goods department. I can then see for all of my income accounts. Mostly it looks like a revenue account and a shipping income account. I can see for various locations and classes, which I've omitted, all of the summed amounts that hit that selection. And I can see that broken up by period. So I could export this into Excel, throw it into a pivot table, start massaging that data, and build out those trends, those analyses that I want to then turn into my budget. I can kind of put that all together, put in expected forecasting using whatever methods I care to use in Excel, fit those numbers into the data template that I downloaded from Excel, the CSV template that we just looked at, and then I could import that budget right back into NetSuite. While that is helpful, I think an analytics workbook is even more so. For those of you who don't have a lot of experience with analytic workbooks, a workbook is like an Excel spreadsheet applied to a data set of data, allowing me to do cool things like this, which looks exactly like the format I need to import as a budget. I have a pivot table here where I'm still pulling that same kind of transactional history as I just showed in the Safe Search. But now what I'm doing to that is filtering for those same filters of the United States subsidiary, income accounts, and my home goods product department. Instead of having this long list, however, I'm now creating a matrix version of that, which is what I need for my budget, right? I have a count here on my y-axis and my periods going across on my x-axis, all the way for all the historical data in my system. Starting, it looks like back in August of 2023, all the way up to December 2025. So in this scenario, we're building a budget for 2026. I can export that data directly to Excel. In this case, I need to first refresh the page and then do that export. And then I can, from there, apply any of the Excel formatting I still want to do to build out a 2026 budget. So here it is. I now have an Excel format of all of my historical data. I can delete some here at the header to make this nice and clean. Of amounts for all of my historical data exactly as I need it to. So I can now build out 2026 budget for that product line, that subsidiary. So we'd strongly recommend using a trick like that to get your historical data out of your system to then build a budget to put back in. Let's walk through that really quickly to kind of complete a loop here. Let's go to transactions, financial, and import a budget, shall we? I've already filled one of those out, so I'm going to go to my documents and import a 2026 income budget for home goods. Clicking next takes me to a screen that looks very familiar to anyone who's imported CSV files into NetSuite. Because of the titles matching almost perfectly, everything auto maps except this customer job, customer project. I can run that and it says 2 out of the 2 lines for my budget were completed. So now if I come back into my budget and select that same grouping for 2026 and my US sales income and for my product home good department, here you can see the projected totals that I completed in that Excel file. I applied a basic percentage increase. I did some analysis using some tables and then imported into my sales revenue and sales shipping income accounts my projected income for 2026 for that specific department. All right, to wrap up our time together, let's spend a few minutes on reporting, right? The end goal of all budgeting. So taking a look at the budget income statement, keep in mind that I haven't filled out a very, very robust budget, but to give you a general idea of what budget reporting looks like in NetSuite rather, here you can see my budget income statement. I have selected a company-wide budget, so I'm looking kind of across all subsidiaries in my system. I have no classification selected, so I'm looking at all data for this budget in its entirety. And you'll notice that with negative gross profit for this income statement, I have not completed any income related information, but rather only cost information. So here I can see all of these costs broken down. But as I look over this, maybe totals just don't look right. I think there's budget information missing. How could I find that out? And therein lies our second budget report, which is the budget income statement detail. If I click on a detail link, I will now see individual budget lines broken out. So I can see, oh, okay, of course my budget numbers are wrong. I haven't uploaded the budget for my non-production departments. I've only uploaded for the headquarters subsidiary the production department cost. Okay, so that's why my budget numbers look off. And as I look through, I can see that nothing else exists other than my production department for both personnel and fixed assets. As I complete additional budgets, this becomes a much more fuller budget income statement, and I can then see my total budget income statement as I fill out everything. This goes back to our very original slide. When we think about and project out what we want our budget to look like, the simpler the better to start. Because the more granular we make all of our classifications and our accounts, of course, the more detailed our budget must be to be complete, to be a full view of what we're looking for. All right, with budget versus actuals, let's take just 2 minutes to look at the actual historical data that we reviewed against 2025 for our budget, and then look at the 2026 budget that we just imported. So we're going to switch over here looking to the fiscal year 2025, so January to December 2025. I have my category of the US sales and income, my context of United States, and here you can see my actuals, my amount column versus my budgeted. I'll zoom in there just a little bit. To someone paying attention very closely, you'll see that my budget amounts are much lower than my actuals for 2025. Similar to the last report, something is missing. If I remember that the department I did my budget for is home goods, I need to further refine, because that's the only budget I've imported for this segment. I should apply that department to this view. When I do that, now I'm comparing the budget, the specific home goods budget I imported, to the actuals of home goods. Prior to applying this, I was looking at the holistic view of everything in that subsidiary for income accounts, and the budget for only one classification, for one department. So when I apply that, you'll see that my budget, I actually came very close to budget when it came to my revenue and shipping income numbers that I was interested in. You'll see some, looks like COGS, my actuals here, so probably a part of my 2025 budget should have included COGS, of course, in the full scenario of me filling out the entire budget. For just looking at budget amounts to actuals, it looks like I came just over my budgeted amount of $627,000 and just over my shipping income budget as well. So here I see just over 100% and my amounts over budget. All right. With that, thank you very much for your time. We will take a quick look just to wrap up here to prove out the concept that I did import a 2026 budget together. If I refresh this information together, assuming that I haven't had many actuals, right? Because this is like a December exercise that we're doing together. Here I can see my budgeted amounts for the year. So I've put in my budget, but no actuals. And as I put in actuals, I can break that out and actually see period over period as actuals occur, how they compare to my budgeted amounts in each period broken in. All right, well, thank you all for joining us for a really cool session on budgeting and forecasting and some of the tricks therein. And let's turn it over to questions.